Baldur's Gate 3 is full of story, a wealth of unique characters, quests, and riddled with romance, charm, and player agency. But all the persuasion in the realms won't prepare you for what to do when all else fails and steel and spells collide. Welcome back, friends. I'm Rogue, and today we are going to be discussing the combat of Baldur's Gate 3. My intention with this video is to help players who may not be familiar with the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set grasp a firmer understanding of how combat in Baldur's Gate 3 works. Let's get after it. Combat begins when diplomacy is no longer an option, and two opposing sides clash in a flurry of weapon swings, footwork, and spellcasting. Baldur's Gate 3 organizes the chaos of combat into a cycle of rounds and turns. During a round, each participant in a battle takes a turn. The order of turns is determined at the beginning of a combat encounter. This is called initiative. After everyone has taken a turn, the fight continues with the beginning of the next round, if neither side has defeated the other. Initiative is the ringing of the bell in a fight. It's where every combat encounter begins. This is established by having everyone in the encounter make a dexterity roll to determine what order you are placed within the battle. Typically, the higher your initiative, the better. You retain this placement within the conflict until either your team or your foes have fallen. Another aspect of initiative is called surprise. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory, meaning you or the bad guys have gotten the jump on the other. The team or individual who is surprised does not get an action during the surprise round, which takes place before normal initiative. Getting the jump on your enemies is a great way to give your heroes an advantage in combat, so you should aim to surprise your foes whenever possible. When it is your turn in a round, you are faced with a variety of options, many of which are dependent on your hero's chosen class, but all actions in combat chew up your hero's action economy. The most basic of actions a character can do is to simply attack with whatever weapon they are carrying or holding, or perform an unarmed strike if not holding a weapon. This is a simple 1d20 roll opposed by the armor class of your target. Casting a spell is a subsidiary form of this action. Some spells do not require a full attack action, but we'll cover that in a little bit. For now, many of the spells of Baldur's Gate 3 require a full attack action to use. Using a spell that requires an attack action takes up the same action economy as swinging a sword or throwing a spear. The dash ability allows you to move double your hero's full movement, and typically requires an action. Again, there are some classes that can skirt around this, but for the most part, dashing costs an action and is typically used to either create distance with an enemy or close the gap. Helping a fallen ally from the dying state is another action ability. This brings a comrade from the dying state to their feet with 1 hit point, allowing them to re-engage in the combat encounter, but we'll cover death and dying later on. Disengaging from an enemy to reposition without provoking an attack of opportunity requires your hero's action. This allows you to move away from threatening enemies without having to dodge their incoming attacks, and is a great way to keep your squishy spellcasters out of a precarious situation. A bonus action is considered an action that doesn't take very long to perform and are typically tied to a hero's class, but there are 4 very solid bonus actions that are tied to all characters. Shove. This is one of my favorite abilities in Baldur's Gate 3, and if you haven't tried it, you're missing out on a wealth of funny moments. The skill is as simple as it sounds. You attempt to shove your target away from you, or off a cliff. Shove is tied directly to your hero's athletics skill and opposed by your target's athletics or acrobatics check. This check is resolved by a 1d20 roll from both participants. Shove is always successful if you are hidden or invisible. More on hidden attackers later. Hiding mid-fight is available to all heroes. Now, this ability relies on your hero's stealth skill or the terrain in which your characters are fighting. Enemies in Baldur's Gate 3 have a conal vision that appears in red when you are skulking about. Chances are, if you're not within this area, even your cleric has a shot at getting out of sight. Jumping to get a height advantage on your enemy or to land beside them on a higher or lower elevation requires a bonus action. This is another great way to keep your ranged allies out of the fray, or to set your barbarian right beside that pesky goblin shaman. The jump action is tied to a character's athletic skill, and even if your hero isn't proficient, they will always have a set distance that they can leap. The jump spell is also a great addition to any caster's suite of arcane goodies, and dials the jump skill to 11. And offhand attack. This is reserved for heroes who dual wield. Yeah, the edgy boys get to swing with both weapons. But the option for even a wizard to wield a dagger in both hands is an option. It might not be a great one, but you can. I'm just saying. The offhand attack is typically weaker than your hero's main hand attack when it comes to damage, meaning that it will only do the damage variable of your weapon and not your corresponding ability score, such as strength or dexterity, though this can be remedied with feats later on. Using a reaction in Baldur's Gate 3 is always tied to a race or class ability. These actions require a trigger to be performed, usually being smacked by the bad guy is all that's required. For example, the Warlock or Tiefling's Hellish Rebuke spell is a reactionary spell, meaning it doesn't need to be your turn to retaliate on the guy that just bonked you. Upon being bonked, you will be given the option to cast Hellish Rebuke and give him a little taste of hellish fire. Reactionary abilities are usually few and far between, and as I said, are always class or race dependent, but they are worth keeping an eye out for. Character movement is based on the race of your hero. Again, there are classes that modify your hero's movement, but smaller races such as halflings and gnomes have a base movement speed of 7.5 meters. The taller races such as humans and elves have a base movement of 9 meters. The wood elf and the half-wood elf have even more, sitting on a 10.5 meter movement speed. There are many spells that can affect a hero's movement, some even allowing your hero to fly or ignore difficult terrain, which reduces your hero's movement by half. Difficult terrain can also be avoided with the athletic skill. Even if not proficient, your hero can attempt to jump to avoid these obstacles, although jumping in this manner still costs a bonus action. Okay, let's talk about the dice rolls for just a moment. Throughout your epic battles, you will roll the 20-sided dice a lot. Although some spells and abilities do not require an attack roll, they are trumped vastly by the number of abilities that do. The reason I bring this up is because I want to talk about advantage, disadvantage, and critical hits. We'll start with critical hits because they're my favorite. A critical hit in Baldur's Gate 3 is when you roll what is commonly referred to as a natural 20, meaning that the roll itself, not including any modifiers or bonuses, equals 20. This is called a critical hit and will strike the target regardless of their armor class. When you score a critical hit, the damage dice is doubled, and any other modifier is added regularly. For example, if you score a critical hit with a club that normally deals 1d6 damage, you roll 2d6 instead. Then any other damage bonuses are applied. On the other end of the spectrum is a natural 1. This attack will always miss regardless of any modifiers your hero has. Advantage is when your character has an edge over their opponent. This can occur due to a class-specific dialogue or magical effects. When a hero has advantage, they are allowed to roll 2d20 and then select the higher result for the given situation. For example, if you have advantage to attack a goblin, you roll 1d20 twice, and let's say you get a 6 and a 16. You receive the 16 as your roll and ignore the 6. There are many ways to get advantage within Baldur's Gate 3. One of the easiest is for your hero to have the high ground. Take that, Anakin. Disadvantage is exactly the same, except you are forced to take the lower result, meaning that you would be forced to take the 6 for your attack roll and probably miss the goblin. Attacking a hidden or invisible enemy is one of the easiest ways to incur disadvantage. Knowing these two conditions is important because there are many spells and abilities that can blind the bad guys or hide your party, allowing you to take advantage or impose disadvantage on your enemies. Let's talk about damage. When your character lands an attack with a melee or ranged weapon, your damage is calculated by combining the dice value of the weapon and your corresponding ability score modifier. For example, if you are wielding a dagger that deals 1d4 damage and you have a dexterity of 16 granting you a +3 modifier, when you strike with your dagger it deals 1d4 +3 damage. Spells have their own damage values attached to them as well as the type of damage they deal. There are 13 damage types in Baldur's Gate 3, and I'll show them here for easy reference. The reason I bring this up is because there are many creatures in the Forgotten Realms that have damage resistance, or are flat out immune to some of these bad boys. Don't worry, some heroes come equipped with damage resistance. The Barbarian, for example, is resistant to physical damage while raging, and the Draconic Ancestry Red Sorcerer is resistant to fire damage. Resistance, simply put, is they take half damage from the damage source that they are resistant to. On the flip side of the damage coin is Vulnerable. A creature that is vulnerable to fire will take double damage from any fire attacks they receive. Which brings me to healing and death. When a character takes enough damage to reach 0 hit points, they drop into the dying state. This death state can be fixed by one of two ways: healing, such as a cure spell from a cleric, or the help action from a fellow party member. If the character is left in the dying state, a life and death counter will appear over the character's head, and the process of rolling death saving throws will begin automatically. Each round, the dying character will have a 1d20 rolled for them. On the roll of a 10 or below, they will advance the dying state. For any roll above 10, they will gain a stability point. If they succeed 3 times, they will revive with a small amount of hit points. If they fail 3 times, they die. I know that this is a lot to drink in, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And hey, if you're listening to this, that means you made it to the end of the video, and for that, thank you. I hope that this has helped someone along their Baldur's Gate 3 journey, and I'll talk to you guys later. Goodbye.